Hi YouTube, Darth here. While we're in the midst of the vehicle rebalance on the community test environment, I wanted to talk a little bit about a major systems change we got introduced to a little more than 2 years ago. This was the time between Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 when DICE was hyping the next game and they introduced the concept of vehicle criticals. Today I'd like to talk about how the critical system in Battlefield 4 differs from its origins in Battlefield 3 and how that's affected gameplay 2 years on. For those of you who do not remember, in Battlefield 3 a ground vehicle would typically be disabled when it was reduced to less than 50% health. Any source of damage, no matter how large or small, could accomplish this effect once the vehicle dropped low enough in health. At this threshold, the vehicle would catch on fire, be reduced to 1/2 its non-boosted movement speed, and if it wasn't repaired, it would continue to tick down until it exploded. For helicopters and jets, this threshold was quite a bit lower at 35%. Again, they would continue to burn to zero until they exploded. But unlike Battlefield 4, jets and helicopters didn't fight you very hard while disabled. If an engineer was repairing the vehicle, they would have to repair it all the way to 100% to remove the fire effect, or the vehicle would have to use the fire extinguisher countermeasure, which almost nobody used except in the case of pro jet pilots. As long as the vehicle was not on fire, it would, at least on normal, automatically repair itself to 100%. This vehicle disable system worked pretty well for the life of Battlefield 3. It was consistent and predictable, but did have some shortcomings that I'll get to when I compare both of these systems side by side. In Battlefield 4, the game changed pretty dramatically. The disable system was reworked into the critical system. Under the critical system, vehicles no longer permanently lose mobility until they are repaired, they instead only lose mobility temporarily depending on damage done. However, under the critical system in Battlefield 4, helicopters and jets also suffer from mobility disables. The critical system has two varieties, light and heavy, which is tied to the amount of damage taken from a single source, missile, or projectile. During a disable, vehicles have their automatic repair turned off for the duration of the disable. When a ground vehicle suffers a light critical, it is slowed for 10 seconds and is reduced to half its normal non-boosted speed. For example, on the tanks, a light critical is considered to be any hit doing more than 29% damage. When a ground vehicle suffers a heavy critical, it is frozen in place for 10 seconds. On tanks, a heavy critical is any single hit doing more than 39% damage. This is generally any rear shot projectile or single charge of C4. In the case of air vehicles, any damage over 19% is considered a light critical, while any damage over 29% is a heavy critical. The transport chopper is a special case requiring 12 and 18 damage for a light and heavy critical respectively. The amount of time spent disabled by either is roughly the same, around 5 seconds. However, the amount of control in a heavy critical situation is less than a light critical. Before I directly compare the two systems, I wanted to frame this with DICE's specific explanation of why they made this change. From the Road to Battlefield 4 update on the official blog, DICE representative Slyopaki wrote that the way the Battlefield 3 disable system worked changed a lot about vehicle combat in Battlefield for the better, but there were still some things about the system we didn't like based on how players reacted. Primarily, it always felt like you had to abandon the vehicle when becoming disabled, even though there is always the possibility of still winning the fight. And if there's no engineer nearby, the vehicle is most likely going to explode anyway, so there's not a lot of reason to stay in the vehicle. Now, I can see where DICE is coming from, but knowing what we know now, it seems like the critical system didn't make a big difference for inexperienced players. I know I still see almost daily premature bails on vehicles. Slyopaki goes on. The critical hit damage threshold is carefully tweaked alongside the damage zones and glancing hit scaling on each vehicle in a way that promotes playing smart as both a vehicle operator and in an anti-vehicle role. This new concept of temporary critical hits means that we keep the sense of impending danger that a damaged vehicle brings while still allowing for brave drivers to regain control and keep fighting. This part does resonate true, as even when I read this for the first time, I could see how it was going to put a lot more power in the anti-vehicle infantry hands. So what do these two games' disable and critical systems look like in direct comparison? Because any damage in Battlefield 3 can cause you to tip over the disable point, any weapon that could damage a vehicle could theoretically disable a vehicle as well. In Battlefield 4, only specific weapons can critical a vehicle. The difference is that sustained punishment would disable a vehicle in Battlefield 3, but only specific spikes of damage can critical a vehicle in Battlefield 4. For example, an attack helicopter in Battlefield 3 could stop an armored vehicle from moving with just rockets. In Battlefield 4, unless the vehicle is hit by a high damage rocket and it is not currently under the effect of a critical, it can continue moving up to the point it passes under 10% remaining health. Battlefield 4's critical system also allows the developers to create nuanced weapons that are better or worse at criticalling vehicles. For example, the RPG is slightly better than the rest of the engineer rockets at criticalling an armored vehicle, while the MBT law cannot critical any armored vehicle whatsoever. Next, in Battlefield 3, disabling an aircraft meant that it slowly burned down to zero. Critical hitting an aircraft in Battlefield 4 makes the aircraft difficult or impossible to control because of stability, sometimes with fatal results. On helicopters, this often means that the helicopter cannot get away from a constant stream of missiles. Overall, aircraft impairment is much stronger in Battlefield 4 and allows infantry to chase down and destroy helicopters in particular. In Battlefield 3, the disable system meant that engineers had to get either a rear shot as an opener or a bunch of sustained damage to disable and slow a vehicle. If the vehicle had a repair, or two in the case of tanks, it could be very difficult to ever stop that vehicle. This was especially difficult if a tank had reactive armor, as the first shot was shrugged off entirely. Tanks especially could simply overrun an infantry position as long as they were not under 50% health. In Battlefield 4, the critical system allows infantry to keep a vehicle from retreating even if it is being repaired. Because of armored angles, the bonus to getting a highly damaging shot at a direct angle is much higher. The bonus isn't just raw damage, but that heavy critical. This is particularly valuable against tanks as it rewards infantry more generously for getting the coveted rear shot on a tank. Now tanks have to play a lot more conservatively against engineers. One thing that the critical system in Battlefield 4 accomplishes, in theory, is allowing more complex decisions for countermeasures. I say in theory because pretty much everybody runs active protection, but the system does allow for interesting combinations of choices. For example, do you run maximum protection against criticals with BF4 reactive armor, or do you choose to do more damage with the autoloader? Finally, as an engineer repairing a vehicle in Battlefield 3, you had to repair a vehicle all the way to 100% health to stop a disable from burning the vehicle to zero. In Battlefield 4, you only have to make it to 15% health for the flames to stop and auto repair to kick in. While most people will probably repair to an amount more than 15%, you can stop a lot earlier and let auto repair make up the rest. This is a really significant difference and means that in general, Battlefield 4 engineers can spend far less time outside the vehicle repairing and a lot more inside. So both of these systems have things that make them pretty good and some pretty obvious detractions. While I was making this video, it was definitely clear to me how much more powerful jets and helicopters were against tanks in Battlefield 3 and how much more powerful those tanks were than the infantry they were running over. In Battlefield 4, a lot more power has been put in the hands of infantry and a lot has been taken away from jets and helicopters. So there is a much more even playing field between types of vehicles in infantry. Obviously, it's still quite possible to dominate in a jet, helicopter, tank, or as an engineer, but you just have to play a lot smarter. Overall, I feel like Battlefield 3's disable system was more consistent for the vehicle pilot and much more punishing to engineers attempting to kill these vehicles, while the Battlefield 4 critical system is much more fair to anti-vehicle engineers and requires much more care out of the vehicle pilot. So here's the question to you folks: which game system did you prefer more? Do you pine for the days of Battlefield 3 with disables, or do you prefer the critical system in Battlefield 4? What do you play more often? Are you inside a vehicle, or are you an anti-vehicle engineer? Finally, is there some way you'd improve on either of these systems for the next Battlefield title? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. This was a fun little video to make comparing two of my favorite Battlefield games. If you have something in BF3 and 4 you'd like me to take a look at in a similar fashion, be sure to comment and let me know. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, YouTube.